30 ppm, maybe more. Or we could have a situation where that same number that we're trying to make a determination on is a plus or minus 1. Now, if we have a very large sump, the sensitivity of the data would indicate that we need perhaps a plus or minus 1. There are circumstances where where less precision may be appropriate, and I don't want to speculate on what that might be for you and your plant. But the problem would be is that when we get data, if the data is not only accurate, it's important that it be accurate, but also important that we understand what that accuracy is. We could fool ourselves into making poor decisions. For example, if it's data that is a plus or minus 10 or 20 or 30 ppm, we could see a trend in the data that really isn't there, because any number within that range is essentially statistically the same number. So we could overreact, or we could underreact. We could miss a problem, or we could make a recommendation to the plant when absolutely nothing is wrong. Both of those cases can be very, very difficult to a program. So the ASTM standards, what they are, they're documents that can be read. They have a certain structure and protocol with definitions and whatnot. References that would be useful to augment the standard, or maybe even find related standards. But at their core, there are a series of steps and requirements that, when followed, can be expected to aid the end user in obtaining a result of known quality, of known usefulness. So this might be not just the steps that we follow, but it could be what instrument we use, what calibration requirements might be necessary with that instrument or with that tool within the instrument, what solvents we use, and then, of course, when. It's very easy to presume that if the steps aren't carefully followed, that we're introducing uncertainty into the data, and uncertainty means a degradation of the data itself. So this slide, I think, is very appropriate, and I touched on it earlier. If we don't understand our data, we have a chance of making a very unfortunate mistake. And when we do this, not only do we cause potential hardship to our employer, to the organization that is using the information we have, but it can also go to credibility. If we are making what we think are great recommendations and we get poor outcomes, and it's because the data isn't necessarily accurate enough or good enough, we can have credibility problems within the organization, which makes it more difficult to maintain a high quality program and to get management support. So we're going to touch on data bias. And what is bias? Well, bias is comparing the measurement or the answer or the number we get to what the answer or measurement should be. And it would be the deviation from what good would look like for that particular number. So how do we determine what a good number is? The easiest to understand would be if we use a national standard where we have a known number that our instrument is targeting or aiming for. You know, very easy if it's a standard that is 10 ppm. To get a test measurement that's at 9 or 10 or 11 ppm and have a good understanding of how accurate the instrument might be. More difficult when there is not such information anchored that would be available to the end user to use. So in this case, we have to have a process whereby we can determine what that good number is, and that's often done with a consensus process. I've got a chart here that and unfortunately the colors didn't come through, but you can see 4 different bullseyes. And I'll go around the circle. I'll start out with low accuracy, upper left-hand corner. And you can see that in this case, we have a data grouping that is very tight. So this could be zeroed in, so to speak, if you compare that to say shooting at a range where we could dial the firearm in to produce data in the center. But this kind of data from a test standpoint would be low accuracy because it has a high bias. And without knowing how to dial it in, we could assume that the data is more accurate than it really is. The one on the bottom left, low accuracy, in this case we have kind of a grouping in that upper, at about the 2 o'clock position, but there is still quite a bit of data scatter. So we actually, the mean of that data set is not in the middle, and it has scatter, so low accuracy. The one on the bottom is kind of an interesting case, because we have a pretty broad distribution. We have a lot of data scatter, but it's well centered to the middle. So in fact, this is data with zero bias, but it's easy to see that it still has low precision because the grouping of the data is not very tight. What we want to strive for is a situation where we have zero bias. The data is in the middle where it should be, and highly precise, meaning that there's a very tight grouping. This is the information that will help us get the best possible outcome. Okay, so you can correct for bias. The example I gave of a firearm and zeroing the gun in to pull the pattern into the middle, but you can't correct readily for imprecision, which would be the data scatter. So let's talk a little bit about two terms that you see in all ASTM documents that produce numbers, and that would be the precision terms of reproducibility and repeatability. So what are these two key terms? So what repeatability would be, if we took a technician and we set the technician up in the laboratory and they followed word for word the sequence of the ASTM standard and did all the steps in proper order using the proper solvents, the proper instrument, the proper calibration, and they were to repeat this same experiment on the same material a number of times, we would produce a data grouping, and that data grouping would be the repeatability of the test. So important to know if one technician can get tight data or tight information. This becomes a little more complicated when we introduce multiple labs into it. So one of the problems with this would be that if your particular service provider provides a measurement that does not have good reproducibility, then when others talk about that machine or that ppm iron or that ppm copper, whatever it might be, their data or their starting point, their bias could be from a different quadrant altogether. And so the data really doesn't talk well and is really disassociated. So the reproducibility would be very similar to repeatability, the proper instrument, the proper calibrations, the proper sequencing of steps, and so on and so forth, but repeated by multiple technicians across many different laboratories. And so the reproducibility, one could expect, would have a larger plus or minus than the repeatability, simply because there are more variables brought into it. So in terms of reproducibility and repeatability, it's nice to have numbers that say the data has this type of precision, but how is that documented? How is that accomplished? There's something called an interlaboratory study that ASTM does. So each of the test methods that produce a measurement would have a research report behind it. And what that would be a group of collaborators, laboratories, number might be 5 or 10 or 20, whatever the number might be, that test the same material or materials. If the scope statement covers turbine oils and compressor oils and gearboxes, then samples would need to be tested for each of those broad classes of lubricant types or machine types. And if that's done across several laboratories and the same material from each of those groupings tested by the entire population, then at the end of the day, quite a bit of data is collected. And that data is distilled through statistical methods to determine what the repeatability and the reproducibility, or another way to look at this, what the precision of the data might be. And that information is then rolled up into what we call an interlaboratory study research report. And ASTM will take these documents, which are also vetted by the groups that write the standards, And these become a part of the paper trail, so to speak, of the test method. So when the repeatability and reproducibility numbers are there, then that information would be backed by some hard science, which makes it very, very powerful. So in terms of oil analysis, just some of the types of things that, that one might accomplish. One type of standard might be condition monitoring background how-tos, guides about how to set trend data or set limits or apply failure modes, type techniques to determine what testing we should even do on a particular machine. What is cost effective? What would be effective in terms of an expectation of what we can monitor at all? That would be one type of a standard. Another would be just the base chemistry. Think of lubricant testing. One can also take the position that while we're testing for the wellness of a machine, we are also testing for the wellness of the lubricant and changes that are occurring that need to be monitored. And then when it comes down to it, we have test methods, and the test method is the type of an ASTM document that actually produces a measurement. And that measurement, as discussed earlier, would be it can be illustrated in terms of how repeatable it is, how reproducible it is, which basically goes to the bias, which we would take to be data that is tightly grouped or tightly in terms of our understanding of what the grouping is, but centered on the bullseye. So we have our expected measurement. You can see the bullseye again. We've met our goal. We have a tight grouping of data. It's right in the middle, but we can also be fooled by the tests that we run. So there are many tests that cover similar type information, say wear metals, many different ways of testing wear metals that are different and that will produce different numbers, different measurements. And one cannot simply substitute one of these test methods for another because the precision is likely to be very different, or the test method may be measuring something altogether different from the ones that we're looking at. So I'll use viscosity as an example. The standard viscosities are really, really precise, and it can be measured in terms of tenths of a centistoke. That's pretty accurate. And one could argue for many condition monitoring applications, more accuracy than we really need. There are other viscosity test methods which are not that accurate, perhaps 2 or 5 or 8% with a plus or minus. And so if the practitioner is presuming that the data is one thing and they buy a test standard that produces a whole different type of a test measurement, then there's a pretty good chance they don't understand their data, and a pretty good chance that the unintended consequence will result of just simply bad information being conveyed to the program, to the site, the facility. I'll touch on the 3 different major types. I talked about some functionality earlier, but the 3 different types of ASTM products have a very specific name. So there's an ASTM guide, which is a very narrowly focused guideline on how to accomplish a limited something, how to trend data, how to set limits on the data. How to apply the technique failure modes and effect analysis to decide what testing we should even do. These would all be examples of ASTM guides. A standard practice is another type of an ASTM document. If you noticed with the guides, I wasn't talking numbers. A test measurement, which is normally what we would think of when we considered that. So the standard practice would be, you could think of it in terms of several related guides that are grouped together to form more of an overarching programmatic document. And ASTM 6224 is a really good example of this. This particular standard outlines how an entire condition monitoring program could run with alarm limits and tests to be performed and so on and so forth. And then finally, we have the test methods, and this would be the type of an ASTM document that would produce the measurements that we've been talking about. And so the test method would be the bread and butter. The other documents would be vehicles that would make the goodness of our overall program improved and hopefully make us give us a more robust process. So I'd like to conclude a final point with something that ASTM is providing that I think has potentially a lot of utility for all of us. You know, in that we're in the lubricant arena, the condition monitoring arena, we have programs to test to provide additional information to us. So ASTM has put together a symposium, which is basically a 2-day conference, and this symposium will have 25 peer-reviewed papers in it. So it's very unusual to have a conference with this density of papers that have been carefully vetted and which would certainly imply a much greater level of detail and accuracy and relevance also. And it relates to testing programs and processes. So sorry about the telephone ringing there. So what I'd like to do is invite all of you to participate in this ASTM symposium. You can go to the website. It's under DO2 CS96, and that's how we would get all this information. They'd have a link to it. It is not very expensive. It can be, you can participate online or in person, so it's going to be a hybrid event. So it should work out well for everybody. So thank you very much. I've appreciated spending some time with you. If you have any questions, I'll be available for the questions.
David, and that was great. Thank you so much. We got some questions coming in and some comments. Thank you. Well, Yo, and then well, Yo had some comments, a clear explanation. It's just more of a comment, but just wanted to bring it up to highlight it. And then also, if you have one further add on the ASTM symposium.
Is this for me? Yeah. So
yes, that's for you to add to it. Yeah.
Okay, so I'm live. Yeah, sorry, I didn't understand. Yes, and so the ASTM symposium is going to be really a terrific event. The topics are definitely going to be in line with what we do on a regular basis. The focus is really going to be on producing better data, and part of that is what data do we need in the future and what new testing and instrumentation is coming along that we're going to need to consider to try to put our programs together. So I think an awful lot of good topics, a lot of good information. The 25 papers that I mentioned are going to be bundled into an ASTM product called an STP, and that is something that they're going to sell, going to be available for purchase. I would like to think that with this number of papers and the broad topics we have, it will become an industry beacon. It's going to be a wonderful, wonderful reference document, and one that each of us should consider adding to our own personal libraries. So hope you can attend and look forward to future discussions and comments on those topics.
Okay, and I just posted another question from Yo, and we got some other questions coming in too. So if you could address this one, please. Thank you, Brian.
So ASTM is a very long-standing standards organization, and the condition monitoring arm of ASTM, I think, is relatively new. We're probably 20, 25 years of producing standards. So some of the ASTM documents have been basically adopted by other standards organizations or are referred to by other standard organizations. And DIN, of course, is one of the leaders out there. the IP has very close association with ASTM as well. So all of these work in concert, and I would expect that ASTM would be broadly accepted and adopted throughout the world.
Okay, I'm going to combine this from Kashif. He was a why small and big R, and then also with this question. He had two questions. I'm going to combine them.
Yeah. So the big R and little r are just terms used, and they're very closely related. If you think in terms of how accurate can a single individual get using the same standard versus how accurate could a population of different laboratories get when producing the same test measurement, that would be the difference. So it just comes down to the number of participants that produce the data. So in terms of a greater accuracy, if we have 10 collaborators producing data against the same test, and we statistically look at that, one could argue that that would be more useful because the data would transcend from one service provider to several others. So the bias would certainly be tighter and better. Requirement values that are within. Yeah, so and if I understand this question, if we don't follow the ASTM requirements carefully, then we introduce an additional unknown into the test stream. So it would be very hard to take credit for the repeatability, for the precision, if we don't follow the standard. And that doesn't mean that variations may not produce highly similar data, or that perhaps somebody's variation might in fact produce better data. So to that point, what I would recommend is that ASTM is a consensus organization and very open to end users or companies or other individuals joining in. So if there's something you see in the data that you think could be improved, that information can be relayed to ASTM, and the committee will address it. Each of these points that come through, we continually strive to produce better data. But better than that, if you would like to join in and come to ASTM and schedule a presentation at the meeting for the standard you have interest in, the group is very, very open to listening to your ideas and seeing your data. And in my time with ASTM, I've seen many examples of somebody bringing information into the meeting and saying, you know, we can do better than this, or there is a problem with this or that, and then the organization working very diligently to vet that out, and then as appropriate change the documents and improve the standard. So please consider joining in and participating.
And we have 3 more questions, and we're going low on time, but we want to get to these questions. So here you go.
Well, accuracy is being very consistent with the test method. So if we don't follow the test method, then we would undermine our accuracy. So if you're using a service provider that claims to produce data like ASTM or a variation of ASTM, then what you're really buying is something that you have no idea about. And you know, they can make any claim they want, but if it's not anchored to the process, you're accepting an unknown. And hopefully you're not doing that at a higher price than you would need to pay for the highest quality information. Now, I saw a point on wear particle analysis, and there are standards that discuss wear particle analysis, terminology, and how to characterize particles as well. So the reliable, this is actually an interesting question about, is one test method more reliable than the other? It could be in your particular application. So let's talk wear metals, and a gearbox is a good example. If we have a gearbox that has 3 ppm iron, you know, industrial gearbox, we're probably not going to take action at that type of information. You know, maybe at 40 or 50 will do something, or 20 will do something, or 100 will do something, depending upon the system. But so the reason I bring that up is if we have a test method that has an accuracy of plus or minus 5 ppm iron, and we're using it for gearboxes, and we get a number from 0 to 5, do we really care what that number is? So that accuracy may be perfectly fine for the application. So the answer to this particular question is we need to be sensitive to our needs, and we need to buy appropriately to get the correct level of information.
And we have about a minute left, Brian. That was the last questions right here, buddy.
Yeah, I'm trying to see this last question. I had a little pop-up that said I have no time. I can't see it. Okay. So in terms of the wear metals are actually a little bit easier because you can go to the national, you can go get a national standard, and the national standard would be basically for that type of an instrument, dissolved metals that are carefully measured and blended and vetted by a national organization, and that is accepted as a known value. So those are actually pretty easy. We can buy the standard. It comes with the certification, and we can use that on our instrument. We can see how we're doing against the standard. A little more difficult if we don't have a national standard to anchor to.
Okay, Brian, thank you so much. That was a lot of questions, everybody. Thank you. And again, you can go into the speaker profile.
Yeah, thank you very much.